Please give a warm welcome to extraordinary filmmaker Carla Gutiérrez.
Wow, thank you so much. This is amazing.
Yeah, well, you deserve it. I mentioned that Carla, there were so many things that I admire about what you've done with your film. The first time you direct a documentary film on your own, which is like mind-blowing. We're used to seeing documentaries where it's facts, dates, etc. You lean on the emotions and on the feelings. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the movie, I'm thinking, I don't need facts. I'm getting everything I need from the emotions and the feelings expressed in the movie. Can you tell us about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think it was FRIDA who guided that. I mean, really the objective of our film was to hear the most intimate feelings and thoughts from FRIDA directly. And we did a lot of research to understand the facts, to understand what happened in her life, how academics have understood her. But at the end of the day, it was really her own spirit in her own writings that we really wanted to highlight and to bring to life. And you know, I mean, maybe it was a challenge, but I think it was a gift that she never wrote an autobiography, that she never really, you know, did like an extensive interview. So all of her writings were really like emotional reactions to what was happening in her life, but she wasn't really describing what was happening in her life. And we really lean into that, you know, and she kind of guided us.
Well, you mentioned that the whole film is her voice. I would have, halfway through, as I said, I was wondering, how can she carry, you, Carla, continue this? You found enough material that filled her voice. You don't include other voices. The whole time is FRIDA's voice.
So when I had the idea of the film, because I had been obsessed with FRIDA since I was 19 years old. I'm not gonna say my age right now, but it's been a few decades. But I knew a lot about her life. I had read many books, and I had read fragments of her writings. And so when I started this journey, I knew that she could tell part of the story. But I actually thought that we were going to have to rely on other people's voices. From the very beginning, we never wanted to really talk to any experts and have a film be from like the distance of history, and people like explained what she meant. But we thought that we were going to use voices of people that knew her really well and that were present in her life and were witnesses and had testimonies of what happened to her. But then we started the research and we started collecting all of her writings, and we even, you know, made sure that we found like little notes that she sent to her mom from school. You know, it's like, I'm gonna be late for lunch. Can you send me a few centavos so I can have lunch, you know, I can eat something in the city. And it was kind of like handing her over the mic, and she didn't want to let go. And you know, and through the editing process, through putting the story together, we realized like she could really, if we lean into the emotions, like you said, she could really kind of take over the narration of her life.
There's one passage that I was blown away watching, and it's the sequence where she finds out that Diego has been having affairs. The way you portray her in your editing, you show her questioning herself, blaming herself, angry. There's this gamut of complexity and contradictions in the character that, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. You know, can you tell us about portraying her so, you know, contradictory and everywhere? I mean, she loses her temper. It's phenomenal.
Thank you. I wish it could have been in the conversations we had when we were putting the film together, because we really talked. I mean, we sat down with my team and talked through all of that a lot. Because I remember somebody in my team said, "Oh wow, this is not a hell yeah feminist story, but this is like a messy feminist story," because she's become such a symbol of female empowerment. But we're so complex, and I think that, kind of allowing ourselves to be that complex and to express that out I think it was her gift to us through her art, and even through the way that she wrote her letters. And thank you. And and it's difficult. I mean, complexity, for me, that moment was really important to show how she felt unworthy of love and how she also hated herself. I'm just a girl that has been abandoned by her husband, and I think that we need to create space for that, to really be able to kind of like reflect on our fragility and our weaknesses as much as our strength and our power.
On the same vein of what you just said about her, is that she's become a symbol of queerness, of, she's a big symbol of the gay and community. But in the film, you don't label her, and she doesn't label herself. She just loves, and she just lives. Can you tell us about that aspect?
That was something that we also kind of allowed her to guide us, because she, in her writing, she never really talks about it in a, this is who I am, but she was very open in her paintings. She showed herself fully, and we wanted to kind of highlight and very much respect the way that she expressed all of herself. The only time we mention it in the film is really kind of like an insight into, like the homophobia of like the machism world around her. Is like her husband reacting to, right, her sexuality. And that was also important for us, the way that he saw her in a way. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think is really beautiful in the way that, like she was very like, this is me, and she, in every aspect of life, right? And one thing that was really important for us, for example, is that when she was really young and she was like exploring feelings of pleasure and desire, in a culture that sometimes tells women not to do that, and to kind of repress those feelings. And she just kind of like went ahead and like explored them in a really beautiful way. And I think that's just how she treated life and how she treated love and how she treated like, her own sexuality, which I really admire. I wish when I was a little girl, I was just like, oh, this is interesting. This desire I'm feeling, I wish I could have like gone for it.
Correct.
The way that she did. So we really wanted to be guided by her in that way.
I mentioned to you that I read her biography. I thought I knew everything about Frida, but when I was watching the film, I was stunned at her humor and how self-deprecating she is. Even at the end of the movie, when she's facing death, she is being self-deprecating and funny. Yeah. Was that a discovery for you too, how funny she is?
It was. So I also knew, I don't feel like I learned, through making this film, I really learned any new details of what happened in her life, but I feel that I got to know her in a much more profound way, because because...
And that's what your film does.
Oh, thank you.
We find that we go in this very profound inner world.
I think it's, it is the choice of like using her own words that gives us that intimacy with her.
Well,
But
kudos to you.
Thank
But
you.
we were talking about the humor
oh yes,
and the self-deprecating quality.
so there's a few letters, especially when she's in Paris, and also the letters in New York, where I actually think I learned a couple of new swear words in Spanish, and I thought I knew them all. I mean, we had different swear words to choose from because she kept going and going and going and going. We could have had like a whole 20 minutes on like her talking about Parisian intellectuals, and that was. I mean, she had such a biting tongue that I got a lot of pleasure from like hearing her like react to the world like that. I mean, she was very critical as well of everybody. I also really loved that I really heard her fragility. So it was actually her sense of humor that was kind of surprising to discover. And it was also like how fragile she was in some of the letters, especially when she talks about maternity and like not knowing if she wants to be a mother or not. And, is my relationship with my husband gonna change? Is my health good enough to carry this baby? I really felt that she was very alone and incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
And I hadn't gotten that from the books that I had read when I just read tons of books about her.
Speaking of leaning into the feelings and emotion, the passage where the accident takes place, instead of you recreating what happened visually, you lean on the feelings and the way she's feeling and the emotions. It's a stunning passage. Can you talk about your approach to that accident?
I think for the entire film, part of that was really trusting the way that she expressed those feelings in painting. In that moment of the accident, I think is one of the first moments where we really kind of like jump into her paintings, and the whole concept for that was, it's like, nos zambullimos en su mente y su corazón. Like I wanted people to feel like they were physically diving into what was happening inside of her internally. And so there's so much like meaning in her paintings that we wanted to explore.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the combination of some of the words that we use, from her, and really the explosion of color, even if it's about pain or like a broken, like physically really broken. I think that's the combination that gave us like, the intensity of her feelings. And then you have to let go of some things as a filmmaker, right? It's really interesting because every description of her accident, there's this beautiful description of her having gotten completely naked and covered in gold paint. And it was, it was in the fiction film about her, most retelling of that accident, that's the image that you get of FRIDA. But when we play with that phrase, it didn't really feel like she was really feeling it. It felt like this like exterior sense of her. So that's one of the choices we made. Like I just let go of that description because it didn't feel like it was really coming from her pain, or like even this sense of silence of like, where am I? I'm not feeling anything. Hard choices, right? Yeah.
Speaking of the accident, I was always in the belief that the accident was what inspired her to be painting. But in your film, I gather that the miscarriages had more of an impact in her and her painting.
Is somebody recording this interview?
Yes.
Great. I want to show this interview to my team because all the conversations, like you're bringing up all the conversations that we had when we were putting this film together. It's amazing.
Okay, well, you're putting me on the spot, but go on.
I love it. Before we started putting together the film, editing the film, I actually talked about it. That was really important for me because I do feel like, at least the way that I see it, I feel that it was her loss of not being able to become a mother that really gave FRIDA the voice of an artist. It was from that loss and from that pain. The accident, made her lonely. So you can see that the paint, and gave her a lot of time, and she was bored and she needed to do something, and that's how she started painting. But a lot of those early, portraits of friends was kind of like a way to communicate with other people. Like, don't forget about me, don't miss me. Here, have this token of love. And that's what she did with a lot of her paintings later on. But her essence, I don't think, was on those paintings yet. And it was really the miscarriage that like created, and that loss that really created Frida.
When did you have the brilliant idea that animation was the way to bring her world to life?
From the beginning. Actually, it was, I knew that I feel really strongly about my own experience with paintings that I get to see in museums. Going to museums and having an interaction with art is something that is really, very important, emotionally important to me. I was actually in Paris a couple of weeks ago, and I actually started crying in one of the rooms at the d'Orsay. So I knew what that kind of conversation one can have with a painting when you're sitting in front of it, when you're looking at it, when you're talking to it. And I knew that in film, you maybe could not have that conversation. Film is a different art form. It moves differently. It moves forward. You're following a story that is propelling you into the next thing. And for me, it was really important to capture the essence of what she was trying to say in the paintings, but bring that into this new art form that is film. And that's when animation came into play.
But there were other aspects of the usage of the animation that are so brilliant. It's the fact that you have a lot of archives and you have a lot of black and white photographs. And then all of a sudden, the animation sort of bridges the past and the present and also her inner world. Did you all of a sudden started realizing, wow, this is a great gateway?
Yeah, I love the idea. I knew that most of the archival was going to be black and white. I come from an editing background. I've been editing documentaries for a long time, and I've actually worked with a lot of archival.
RBG, I mentioned, you edited RBG and La Corona, other, amazing documentaries you've made.
Thank you.
Edited.
Yeah, and so I was actually I think drooling a little bit at the thought of making her real world mostly black and white, and then having these opportunities to jump into this explosion of color. And I thought that would be a really great bridge into her internal world. And we, not necessarily because of rights or anything, but we did not want to bring any outside elements into her paintings. But we did, quite a bit with her paintings. We added movement. We sometimes, extended backgrounds, duplicated a couple of things. But we also really knew what she meant with the paintings. There, sometimes there's writings that she did about the paintings. They were painted right after something happened in her life. But we wanted to highlight, her paintings are really busy. They have a lot of details, and a lot of the details have a lot of meaning. And we wanted to be able to highlight that meaning, that emotional meaning, for people to pay attention to. So we wanted animation to help us with that.
You animate a lot, but you never mess with the face. Her face, you showcase the face always. Tell us about that.
As you could tell in the film, she was so used to for her pictures to be taken because of her father. And if you look at her self-portraits, they're very similar with the way that she posed for photographs. But but to me, she always kind of like looked straight at the viewer in a way that like she was looking at pain, for example, like she was just facing pain or even facing passion, like straight on, and really really looking at it like without, taking her gaze off. And we were always thinking about what is the emotional meaning of the scene. So for example, when she's saying, I paint myself because that's what I know best. And I'm gonna paint like this, even if I don't sell anything. And I need to sell things because I don't want any more money from Diego, right? I wanted to make sure that she was looking straight at the viewer. So I didn't want her gaze to move or anything like that. There's a little bit of movement, but I wanted that determination where she's facing a new, phase in her life to show in the way that we treated her paintings. And then there's the little dog that comes out. And I was just like, oh, and that was an idea that my animators had, but it's just like, it also shows determination. It's this little dog being like, fuck you world. And then she comes out and she's sitting, very royally. So always thinking like, what is it that we want to highlight in her paintings that makes sense in that moment of our storytelling?
This may come across to you as a strange question, but I'm just going to go for it. I don't think I recall seeing a documentary that is using archival footage where the sound design, I'm listening to organic sounds, I'm listening to breath, I'm listening to brushes, I'm listening to the wind. There is like, you're showing me archives, but they seem to come alive through the sonic world. So,
her breathing became, and even her smoking became really important to me. And that was, we had like a whole day and a half of actually, it's my breathing because we didn't have our actress do enough breathing for us. So yeah, all those like sexual breathing and like also like I hate you, Diego. That's me, which was a really fun day. But we also play with those sounds with her art, and we also included that in the archival. You're right. Painting, for example, the brush, the dryness of the brush actually sounds a little bit like ash. And we play with that because she was smoking so much. There was like a little bit of ash. And then we went with we pushed sounds of different elements. I mean, there's a lot of like fluids in her paintings, so we actually play with that. The fluids are very delicate in her paintings, but we try to emphasize that with the sound. We had a lot of fun with the sound design.
Do you realize that all the stuff that we're talking about, the average documentary doesn't put all this stuff in there?
I guess.
Did you ever have a producer say, what the hell are you doing here? It's like, simplify things.
My producer, I have to say a lot was, actually, our wish was to work in Mexico a lot. And actually,
your entire crew is Mexican.
It's Latino. There's a lot of immigrants, first generation, but we work with a lot of Mexican talent. So all of our animators are Mexican. Our composer is Mexican. He lives in LA, but he's from Michoacan, and he did such a beautiful job. And yeah, and
the music. Tell us about that. The music sounds like it was from the period, but also it's something modern. That, like, I imagine FRIDA with a, iPod listening to music now. The closing credits.
That was our hope. What would she sound like in music? We even ended up playing with voices that ended up in the soundtrack of the film. And yeah, we use instruments. There's a lot of trumpets in the film. That's actually like her determination and strength, if you notice where they come in, or when she finds her voice in her art. You hear a lot of trumpets there, and that's a very traditional, trumpets are used in Mexican music a lot. But then we wanted to make sure that it was also, that she didn't feel dated, that it was, contemporary. So we our composer layered a lot of, he did some really weird things, like electronic things, to a lot of the like under layers of the principal instruments. And then we also had a lot of playlists. I think I should publish them of like what would Frida listen to now. A lot of rockeras. Also a lot of Mexican cumbia, like electronic Mexican cumbia. I think she would have loved it. And there's a little bit of that in the film.
That's great. Speaking of sounds and voices, the actress that narrates Frida, how did you find her, and how did you work with her? I love that she has a raspiness that she's smoking a lot, and the mid-range voice. I mean, how did you come to develop her voice and working with the actress?
So funny story. So the breathing is definitely mine, but then the voice was mine for a while, which I hated. Because we needed to edit the film, and we just needed like scratch voiceover that could come in at 11 p.m. when we were editing at that time. And so, especially hearing my voice for many months, the casting process was really important because we really needed to change everything. We had an amazing casting director in Mexico, the guy that actually casted Roma, who had a lot of relationships. Yeah, I mean, it was so important that we got it right that we just went, for the best. And he has a lot of relationships in the theater. So Fernanda came to us with a lot of theater experience and some TV and film experience. And what we were looking for was this weird combination of a performance that would really capture the maturity of a woman who had lost a lot and who had gone through a lot of pain, while still always keeping that curiosity and rebelliousness and passion for life that she had from when she was little, like that interaction with the world. And when we heard her audition, it was just magic. We try not to look at people's faces so that we didn't have this different image of people. And then we saw her face, and she kind of looks like Frida, which is like, oh, okay. And then when we started recording, what I did was I got into the booth with the actors so that I was very close to her, because the idea was like, what if I was like a close friend of Frida and I was coming to visit her when she's in bed at the end of her life and she's like whispering all her secrets to me, and being funny and like swearing a lot. And that's kind of like what we really wanted to capture, and hopefully that came across. Yeah.
Fantastic. Speaking of voice, the film is a bilingual experience, but we never hear Frida speak in English. Can you, only Spanish, can you tell us about that choice?
Wow, that's very perceptive. So we wanted to always use the original voices, the original language for everybody. And we actually ended up translating some things that Frida wrote in English into Spanish, because it felt, for example, maybe, I don't remember exactly where, but like if she would have spoken about her accident in English, it just would have felt, we weren't in New York yet. And I don't know, for some reason, like it felt like in those moments she really needed to speak in Spanish. I have to say, like, the concept of having this film mostly in Spanish, mostly in her native language, I think that audiences, like all of you guys, are really open to like not, of like being in mystery for a little bit, or not completely understanding everything at that moment. But I think the industry is still a little bit, resistant to it. So when we first took the film out, we got a few no's, because I think people were a little worried about all the archival stuff and a little worried about the Spanish. And I have to say the partners that we got really got it, that, this was not gonna be like a translated film, this had to happen. If we were using Frida's own words, it had to happen in her native language.
And were you in touch with some of her relatives?
Yes. So we met two of her great grand niece and her great grand nephew from the same kind of like part of the family. They're both photographers, which is really interesting. And their father was a photographer who was Frida's nephew. And obviously Frida's father is a photographer. So that family has some kind of genetic, like let's take pictures thing happening. Very different photographers, really beautiful work. They also really look like Carlos, like very much. So it was a little interesting. Cristina Kahlo, specifically, we talked a lot with her. She became a consultant in the film, and we asked her a lot of questions about like how the family itself looked at Frida, right? We just wanted that insight. And she, as a family member, had gone to the hospital where Frida had like, so many surgeries towards the end of her life and had asked for all those records. So, thanks to her, there's like all these records of what happened to Frida physically.
Yeah.
She went through a lot of surgeries that she did not need, that she really wanted to get. It's really interesting. And Cristina does work with museums to bring, exhibitions about Frida's Frida's body. But yeah, what an incredible, right?
Yeah.
Resource to have to be able to kind of like see. Cristina looks so much like Frida.
Wow.
And we met Diego Rivera's grandkid also, who is Diego Lopez Rivera, who doesn't completely look like Diego, but he has Diego's eyes and he's tall. So having like Cristina and Diego together was like, it's a little too weird.
In Mexico, Diego is the bigger star,
Even now.
Even now, that's
Yeah.
where I was leading. It's like, how was it for you navigating that aspect? The fact that Diego is the big star and Frida is in certain aspects she's just Diego's wife.
I mean, I think a lot of Mexicans, look at how internationally we see Frida a little bit, I wouldn't say concerned, but it's interesting to them how big she's become, what a symbol she's become. They are bothered by how much merchandise there is of Frida out there in the world. But what I found really interesting is that there are a lot of people that don't know too much about her, like people outside of Mexico know about her. And to me, it was fascinating to see team members learn a lot about her through our film. And really get very close to her. That was really wonderful. Because in Mexico, they learn about the fathers of muralism, right? That's the big kind of like national pride. That's when Mexico like got to know their indigenous roots and like fell in love with them. I think it was an incredible cultural revolution. So that's an important, aspect of their history. Frida, I think, was discovered, based on the research that we did, she was discovered by women's studies departments in America. It was like, women in America, like looking for the obscure woman in history that really discovered Frida, and they brought her into the light of the art world internationally. So it's a really interesting, discovery.
One last question, and I could go on talking to you forever.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
Yeah, we briefly talked about it outside. It was about the magic realism, which it's an aspect of Latin American culture, and you use magic realism in your film with the animation, et cetera. But magic realism, when it's done in the US, or the vision of Americans of magic realism is like this fantasy, magical thing. You use magic realism in your film to show us pain, to show us dirt, painful things. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's, I think it's something that is an experience that we live through, I think, I don't know about you, but it was very present in my childhood that things just happen, and actually magical things really happen when the worst things are happening sometimes. And there is not, the magical things are not miracles of like good things to come, but it's just like looking at hard, painful things the way that they are. Sometimes they're undescribable and you can't make sense of them. But also embracing that. I mean, really the relationship that has been, in a way, in here sanitized about the relationship that Mexicans have with death. It's a very kind of like raw relationship. It's not making death pretty. It's really accepting that, a big loss has happened, and then dressing it up and in a way celebrating, putting color into like really painful stuff. And yeah, that was something that we were very clear about from the very beginning. I mean, when I said my intention with animation was for the viewers to actually physically dive into the pool of Frida's emotions, I was thinking about it like it was bloody. Like her paintings are bloody, her paintings are like really raw. And I imagine the viewers actually jumping into somebody's heart and being in the mucosity of like blood. And that's the way that I think, we think of in terms of magical realism. It's like diving right into the pain of it and, not questioning the weird things that happen when you're in it.
Well, you're an amazing talent.
Oh, thank you so much.
And what a joy to have you here. Thank you so much.
This is like the best interview ever.
Glad to hear.
So incredible.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.